So if you remember, this is the first Sunday going off or away from lectionary preaching that we've been doing the last 8 weeks. And so I'll be reflecting and praying and thinking about the topics and texts and scriptures and messages of the day to bring to you in the most helpful way that I know how. And I'm starting that out today by raising up May as Mental Health Month. This is the time to talk mental health for everyone, and so this is the first Sunday of Mental Health Month, and that will, at some level, in a broad way, but still that will be informing much of, all of my preaching during the month of May. And there's plenty of things for us to talk about and think about. This morning, I could sum up this sermon with a couple of different titles. Either the somewhat not so exciting title, From Monotony to Meditation. Are you asleep yet? So that's title number one. For those a little more daring, this sermon is something along the lines of, you can't get something from nothing, but sometimes you can get a heck of a lot more from very little than you think. For those who like verbose sermon titles. And I've been thinking about the kinds of emotions that we are having, and I know it depends on who you are and what you're doing. From staying sheltered in to working on the front lines and everything in between, there's a whole range of emotions, and there's a whole array of contexts that can make those emotions powerful and difficult. And listening to my clergy colleagues over the weeks too, who are being very candid about the stress that they're dealing with, and I really appreciated the kind of support I've gotten from fellow pastors who are talking openly about mental health issues, mental health concerns. It concerns everyone, and if you feel that your mental health has not been impacted by this last 8 weeks, then I can almost assure you that it has, because you're in some form of deep denial. But with that said, I want to narrow it down to a few emotions that I think a lot of people are feeling, and my apologies if you don't identify with any of this. I think I'm capturing a lot of us, and hopefully everyone at some level. But these are some emotions that I've commonly heard, or feelings, physical feelings that people are having in these 8 weeks. One is fatigue that comes in lots of different ways. Like, also the disappointment of fatigue. Like, I'm not as nearly as active, so why do I feel more tired? But then there's the real mental fatigue of this. This is mental fatigue. So there's physical, there's mental, there's emotional fatigue with this. So just fatigue, exhaustion is something that we talk about, and just feel like we need to take a breath, as if we've been running, but we've been sitting. Frustration is another emotion that we're all feeling. And by the way, I should have said in the beginning, I have felt and feel all of these emotions from a little to a lot, depending on what it is. So frustration, and I identify with that. So many things to be frustrated with, just at a practical level. Just changing our lives to the degree that we've had to is frustrating. But then there's also the minutia of life that starts wearing on us and causing frustration, so that it's like frustration stacking on frustration on top of frustration, and it's very frustrating. We wish there were more answers. We wish there were better answers. and we wished we didn't feel powerless. And we don't want to say that we feel powerless, but that's part of our frustration too. Anytime you're in places of constraint against your will, fear. Fear. Everyone is experiencing fear at some level, for others, for ourselves, for the future, for the world. These are big fears. And then again, like the frustration, then we begin to be fearful about all sorts of non-life threatening things that are life disturbing things. So those kinds of fears pile up and disable us, what I call disabling fears, that level of emotional fear where it's paralysis and disabling. Totally understandable, but it is a kind of fear that makes it difficult for us to take actions, even simple actions of self-care and things like that. Fatigue, frustration, fear. And then this fourth one, and I'm going to stop just with this one because the list could go on, but I want to bring things together with fatigue, frustration, fear, and monotony. Monotony, or boredom, or purposelessness. Now, those are not the same word. They're not quite synonymous. They have a shared meaning. But if you want to let those words sort of hang with their own kind of impact, you can do that. Monotony, just this repetition of things. And it's a repetition of things that we are reduced to. A repetition of a limited number of things so that the limitedness of our experience keeps getting reinforced and reinforced and reinforced. Boredom, lack of variety, lack of stimulation leads to this kind of fatigue and circles back around again. For many people, it's manifested in a feeling that you have a really strong sense of wasting time. You're not. But sometimes, some days, I know that so many of you are feeling like that. I could be doing this. I should be doing this. I want to be doing this. I'm running out of time. I don't have the kind of time to waste this kind of time. And a feeling of purposelessness, of that monotony and boredom. There is a part that we can sort of anchor our hopefulness in, which is that our sacrifice in monotony and in boredom is potentially saving lives. And that gives it purpose. But that's a hard one to hang on to. And the fact is, there are some people who are going to find out later, this is my guess, when they are tested, that they had it and were asymptomatic and they've been immune for a long time. And nothing that they have done in the past 8 weeks would have, if they hadn't done it, would have harmed them or someone else. And people are going to wrestle with that. Monotony and purposelessness and boredom was with us before this happened. And it's one of those parts of life that is really real and makes life real and is being accentuated right now. The wearisomeness of life, the lack of variety of life, or feeling or sensing the same kinds of things you think. Ironically, this is one of the things that led me to make a commitment to a spiritual life, to a Christian life, and to the Christian faith, was when I read the text that was read earlier today from Ecclesiastes. Because when I first started reading the Bible at about 18, 19 years old, There was lots of wisdom and provocative things in it, of course, and convicting things and profoundly life transforming things when you put them into action. But there was a part of me that felt like there was something missing in the Bible, that wasn't quite real until I read Ecclesiastes, or in Jewish faith, Kohelet. And Ecclesiastes is a book that some people find discouraging to read, actually, but I find encouraging because it's that place in the Bible you can go that really is real, where the person says, you know, I reflected on everything that humans have accomplished on earth, and I concluded that everything, not most things or some things, everything is futile and like chasing the wind. I decided to discern the benefit of wisdom and obtaining a lot of knowledge. And later I concluded that this was chasing the wind too. And I learned that with great wisdom comes great frustration. And whoever increases one's knowledge merely increases one's heartache. Now, that would be pretty defeatist if we didn't have the rest of the Bible, or even the rest of Kohelet's words. But that sense that life can sometimes be experienced in a way that has this repetitious, over and over, monotonous aspect to it that makes you want to die was here before the epidemic, the pandemic. And now it's accentuated. Monotony is a powerful thing. It can break the strongest person. It can. Boredom can make the most creative person, an inspired and capable person, not have a creative thought. These are powerful, powerful things of the human psyche that are always a part of our life, but are heating up right now. And monotony is something we need to wrestle with and break. It is so powerful in some ways that it is the ultimate test of human living, really, to outlive monotony and boredom. And I know that we can all relate to that because of the experience we've been having, but I want to pause just for a moment and turn the page and talk about something very different but shared here about monotony and boredom. Because this is also a time when we're living through great tribulations like this. This is also a time for us to deepen our empathy, because it's a time when we're going to have an opportunity to struggle through things we haven't had to struggle before through, and we're going to be able to think about people who have these struggles all the time. And I think of people in incarceration who have been on our advocacy agenda for many individuals and groups. We understand the advocacy that is needed in our incarceration practices, some people. But this experience for me makes me think even more deeply, even though I didn't have to pause that long to think about the tortures of solitary confinement for individuals. But to just get, I can't even call it a taste, it would be an insult to the kind of agony that people in solitary confinement experience. But I want us to reflect on that kind of struggle and suffering that we're having at various levels with monotony and boredom and powerlessness, and the feeling of time just passing in a wasting way. And think about those persons who are incarcerated and who have dealt with that before the pandemic, and it's multiplied now with the pandemic. And so I want to raise that up as something for us to give consideration and prayer to this week. But there's also some good news here. I know it's heavy with the monotony and boredom, and some of this stuff's not going to go away. And there's still going to be more people incarceration tomorrow morning in the United States than in any country on the planet. That will still be with us. But there's some good news for us. And that is coming right after this. I'll be right back. So when I think of monotony and boredom, the story that comes to my mind, I'm going to guess that some of you, it might have come to yours as well, that is the epitome of the legendary mythological story of boredom and monotony is the curse that the gods placed on Sisyphus. Because Sisyphus had tricked the gods and had gained some benefits of life through it, of eternal life, actually. And he had angered the gods about his trickery. And his curse was to forever push this large stone to the top of the mountain and push it back up and down and back up and down forever. And that was the rest of Sisyphus's life. There is a story about that. I guess that's just a great analogy for what we feel like sometimes when things are monotonous, where you're just pushing heavy loads and only to get to the top and have it roll down and you push it back. It's just over and over heaviness. But we forget that Sisyphus found himself in that situation because he had a great deal of success prior to his trouble at tricking the gods. And it could possibly be that I've been exposed to too much animation with my 1-year-old Vanya in the past 6 weeks. But I have been thinking about a lot of important animated characters that also remind me of Sisyphus. And I'm going to name some of those. Some of them were my favorite when I was a kid. Bugs Bunny. You know, What's Up, Doc? That guy was great. Bugs Bunny solved the hardest problems without so much as raising a hair on the back of his neck, usually. His wit and humor got him by. As is the case with many other well-known tricksters, if you will. It's kind of it's a character or a category of person that sometimes has a negative connotation, but they actually do good. They're heroes. Tricksters are persons who will use, self-effacing means in some ways to overcome the enemy. They're willing to take on the humiliation, and in the end, they become the victor. Bugs Bunny is one. Woody Woodpecker, Tom Sawyer, the Road Runner, Felix the Cat, Brer Rabbit, Sisyphus. There are many of these kind of fictional character tricksters that are worldwide. They're replete, really. Those are just ones that you're familiar with. But in every culture and time period, we find these sort of jokester, trickster characters that are actually very ethical and disruptive, humorous figures that teach the elites and the powerful a truth. And in this, they are able to take these really harsh conditions and turn them around in a way that was never meant to be. And out of it comes beauty and truth, as I said. And the trickster, while there's not very many people that can be the real trickster, and that's why we love them so much, there are some qualities that they have that we can learn from, and I think Jesus did. I'm not quite calling Jesus a trickster, although if I did, I wouldn't be the first to. serious historians and scholars that say he fits this kind of mold, and he does, where he's just continually humorous and uses his humor in a way where a lot of people aren't laughing with him, but the reader starts to get it through his humor, and the power of his message comes through. Well, Jesus does that in Luke 24, this passage that we're familiar with, where Jesus resurrects from the dead, and then he is on the road and he's walking with his disciples, and he disguises himself somehow or does something with their eye. We don't know, but somehow he becomes someone other than Jesus. And they have a conversation with him as a stranger, and they cannot see him for who he is as he bestows truths. In fact, as I mentioned last week, I talked about this sermon too, and Jesus, sat down and went through all the scriptures, it said, with them. So he really spent to try to clear things up with him. But it wasn't until they broke bread that they understood, and when they did, he disappeared. Classic trickster move, which totally made the disciple ask questions that they wouldn't have asked had he not disappeared. Who was he? Didn't our hearts burn within us? But prior to his disappearance, they just thought they had invited a stranger into their house to share a meal. So the disciples had that experience with Jesus too, and Jesus did it on more than one occasion. Also in Luke, as we've heard before, where Luke is taken to the edge of the hill. And he is about to be pushed off because they're so angry at him. And all we're told is that he slips through the crowd and disappears. Trickster. They didn't change their mind and decide not to kill him. They took him to the edge of the hill to throw him off the brow of the hill, it says, and he slipped through them. These kinds of things, I think, are important virtues of Jesus for us to emulate in times like this. To use humor and a kind of comedic way of turning things around that brings life. And it's probably more than this, but I kind of feel like I can highlight three trickster qualities that also fit Jesus and all of these characters that are heroes in this way. And that is that they know and they live and breathe and use the power of humor, including themselves. Laughter at themselves. That's number one. The second thing of a classic trickster is that they have amazing creative energy. And get online and see all that creative energy that's going on right now and be inspired by it. It's the kind of creative energy, that is elusive, where, somebody, you throw a coin in the hat and out comes a rabbit. It's transformative trickster changes. It's transformative energy. It is the stuff where you see doom and gloom and out comes hope. Transformative, creative energy. And I think the best way to possess that is also to try to do it in our lives in all sorts of little ways, like the minutia. Remember the minutia. Different ways to do things, do it. Different ways to cook it, different ways to eat it, different ways to walk there, different ways to get there, do it. Do something new. And Jesus has that amazing ability as well. This amazing, creative, transformative energy where he transformed lives in a moment and where he transforms situations in a moment. Jesus laughed, and I'm certain he laughed hard. I appreciate this in the spirit of interfaith celebration. I appreciate this part about the Buddha, about the laughing Buddha, and that is seen as a virtue. And it's something that Christianity could learn from, because Christianity also has had a long history that has been kind of depressed on comedic humor and using humor to heal. And so with that, as we hunker down in this difficult time as we continue to wrestle with frustration, fatigue, fear, and perhaps most of all, monotony for many people. Don't forget your gifts. Don't forget the opportunities to reflect on Jesus and the kinds of ways he used creative, transformative energy to make a dark place light. Use humor, broaden your lens, have a different perspective, see it from a different way, listen to a different person. Turn your monotony into something interesting. After all, the difference between somebody who hammers away and 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 doesn't know why and is sunk in monotony is doing the same thing the person does who hammers away and hammers away and hammers away and hammers away and hammers away because they're building a wonderful house they're going to live in. And so build your house, turn monotony on its head, rise up from fatigue and frustration and fear. Know that we all are sharing those emotions together, and that we have the gift of God to change it into something good. And that is what the Lord's Supper is all about. We break bread, we share the cup, and out of that very common thing of bread and drink comes life. Let us share communion.